There are places in this world where the air feels different, where the mist rolls in with a kind of intention, and the ancient stones seem to remember things that we have long forgotten. In the green hills of Ireland, the rugged highlands of Scotland, and the mysterious valleys of Wales, the old stories still linger. They whisper from the hollow hills, echo across the windswept moors, and rise with the evening fog from deep, dark lakes. These are the lands of the Celts, and for thousands of years, the people who walked these paths knew with absolute certainty that they were not alone. The world they inhabited was layered, a tapestry woven from the seen and the unseen, where every shadow could conceal a presence, and every unexplained sound carried meaning. Tonight, we pull back the veil on that hidden world. We journey into the heart of Celtic mythology to meet the beings that have haunted, helped, and utterly terrified generations. These are not the sanitized fairies of children's books, but creatures of genuine power and profound strangeness, born from a worldview that saw magic not as fantasy, but as the fundamental fabric of reality itself. Our journey begins not with a sight, but with a sound that has chilled Irish blood for centuries. Imagine a night in the deep countryside of County Cork. The world is wrapped in silence, the kind of profound quiet that only comes when you are far from any town, any road, any reminder of the modern world. The stars are brilliant overhead, and the only movement is the gentle sway of the grass in the night breeze. Then cutting through that peace like a blade comes a cry. It is not the sound of any animal you have ever heard. It is a wail of such pure, unearthly sorrow that it seems to carry the weight of every grief the world has ever known. It rises and falls, sometimes seeming to come from just beyond the garden wall, other times from miles away across the bog. The hair on your arms stands on end. Your heart begins to race, because if you are Irish and if your family is old, you know exactly what that sound means. Death is coming. This is the cry of the banshee, and her voice is an announcement from the other world itself. Her name in Irish is Bean Cedar, which translates directly to Woman of the Fairy Mound. This etymology is crucial because it reveals her true nature. She is not a ghost in the conventional sense, not the spirit of someone who once lived and died. She's something far older and far more powerful. The Cedar, the fairy mounds that dot the Irish landscape, were believed to be portals to the other world, the dwelling place of the Tuatha De Danann, the ancient divine race of Ireland who retreated from the mortal world into the hollow hills. The banshee is a member of that other world, a supernatural entity whose very existence is woven into the liminal space between life and death. She is a messenger, a herald, and in her own terrible way, a guardian of certain ancient bloodlines. Because the banshee does not cry for everyone, her lament is fiercely exclusive, reserved only for families of pure and ancient Irish lineage. The great Gaelic families, names that echo through Irish history, like the O'Neills, the O'Briens, the O'Connors, the O'Gradys, and the Kavanaghs. Each of these houses, it was said, had their own banshee, a spiritual attendant bound to their fate across the generations. The cry itself can manifest in different forms, and each is equally unsettling. Sometimes it is a high, piercing shriek, a sound like shattering glass that sets every dog in the county howling and sends a jolt of primal terror through anyone who hears it. Other times it is a low, mournful sobbing, a sound of such gentle, heartbreaking grief that it seems to seep into your bones. In certain accounts, she is heard singing the Caween, the traditional Irish funeral lament, her voice weaving a melody of loss before the loss has even occurred. The Irish Folklore Commission, established in the 1930s to systematically collect and preserve oral tradition, gathered hundreds upon hundreds of first-hand testimonies from people who swore they heard the banshee's cry on the night a family member died, even if that person was on the other side of the world. Her sound, the stories agree, transcends distance. It is a spiritual announcement that a link in the ancestral chain is about to break. When she is seen, and sightings are far rarer than hearings. Her appearance is hauntingly inconsistent, as if she exists in a state of constant transformation. Sometimes she appears as a young woman of unearthly beauty, pale as milk, with long, flowing silver or white hair that falls to her feet. She is dressed in a grey or white cloak, and her eyes are perpetually red and swollen from centuries of weeping for the dead. Other times she takes the form of a withered old hag, her face a mask of ancient sorrow, her body stooped and fragile, yet radiating an undeniable power. In many accounts, she's seen combing her long hair with a silver comb, and this has led to one of the most enduring folk warnings in Ireland. If you find a comb lying on a path or by a roadside, do not pick it up. It belongs to the banshee, and to take it is to invite her wrath and inevitably her attention. Despite the terror her presence inspires, it is important to understand that the banshee is not a malevolent figure. She does not cause death. She does not hunt or harm the living. She is, in the truest sense, a messenger, standing at the threshold between this world and the next. Her voice, the final otherworldly tribute to a soul that is about to make that eternal crossing. From the solemn and sorrowful realm of omens and farewells, we turn now to a creature whose very nature is chaos, unpredictability, and the kind of mischief that can range from harmless pranks to genuinely life-threatening encounters. This is the puka, one of the most famous and most feared of all Irish fairy creatures, a being whose shape-shifting abilities and mercurial temperament have made it a central figure in Celtic folklore for over 1,000 years. The puka, whose name is pronounced puka and may derive from an old Irish word related to spirits or goblins, is a creature of the wild places, the untamed edges of the human world where farmland meets wilderness, where the known path ends and the dark forest begins. The puka's most defining characteristic is its ability to take on multiple forms, and the form it chooses often depends on its mood, the region, and most importantly, its intentions toward the human it encounters. Most commonly, the puka appears as a sleek black horse, with eyes that burn like coals and a coat that seems to absorb the light around it. But this is no ordinary horse. It's a creature of immense cunning and supernatural strength. The classic puka encounter follows a familiar and terrifying pattern. A traveler walking home late at night, perhaps after an evening at the village pub, sees what appears to be a beautiful black horse standing by the roadside, saddled and bridled, as if waiting for a rider. The horse seems docile, almost inviting. Tired and thinking himself fortunate, the traveler mounts the creature. The moment he settles into the saddle, the puka's true nature erupts. The creature takes off at a breakneck gallop, not along the road, but across fields, over ditches, through thorn hedges and across bogs. It leaps impossible heights and races with a speed that no mortal horse could ever match. The rider, clinging desperately to the mane, is taken on a wild, terrifying ride that lasts the entire night. By dawn, the puka either deposits its exhausted, bruised and utterly traumatized passenger back near their home, or if it is feeling particularly malicious, dumps them in a muddy ditch miles from anywhere, sometimes with a mocking laugh that echoes as it vanishes into the morning mist. But the puka is not always a horse. In some regions it appears as a monstrous goat with enormous curling horns and a shaggy black coat, its eyes glowing with an unsettling intelligence. In others, it takes the form of a gigantic rabbit or hare, a dark eagle, or even a terrifying goblin-like humanoid with coarse fur and a malicious grin. This shape-shifting ability makes the puka a creature of profound uncertainty. You can never be entirely sure what you are looking at, and by the time you realize the truth, it is often far too late. Despite its fearsome reputation, the puka occupies a complex place in Irish folklore. It is not purely evil. It is, in the truest sense, a trickster, a creature whose actions are governed not by malice alone, but by a wild, chaotic energy that exists outside human moral categories. In some stories, the puka can be helpful, even protective, especially to those who treat it with respect. There are accounts of farmers who would leave a portion of their harvest in the field, specifically for the puka, an offering known as the puka's share. In return, the creature would guard their livestock and ensure a good yield the following year. But woe to the farmer who forgot this tribute. For the puka's revenge could be swift and devastating: spoiled crops, scattered animals, and a year of unrelenting misfortune. The puka is also deeply associated with Samhain, the ancient Celtic festival marking the end of the harvest and the beginning of winter, the night we now call Halloween. Samhain was the time when the veil between the worlds was at its thinnest, and on this night the puka was said to be at the height of its power. Berries that remained on the bushes after Samhain were considered inedible, spoiled by the puka's breath or spit, and anyone foolish enough to eat them would invite sickness or worse. The creature represents the untamable spirit of the land itself, a reminder that no matter how much humans might plow, fence, and cultivate, there are forces in the world that remain fundamentally wild. Fundamentally beyond our control. We leave the roads and fields of Ireland now and travel north, across the sea to the cold, deep lochs of the Scottish Highlands. Here in these dark, still waters surrounded by mist-shrouded mountains, an even more dangerous shapeshifter is said to dwell. This is the Ueach, whose name in Scottish Gaelic means water horse, and unlike its Irish cousin the puka, this creature is not a trickster. It is a predator, and its sole purpose is to kill. The Ueach is one of the most feared creatures in all of Scottish folklore, and the stories told about it are not whimsical fairy tales but stark, horrifying warnings designed to keep people, especially children, away from the deadly beauty of the lochs, like the puka. The Ueach most often appears as a beautiful, powerful horse, and the initial encounter follows a similar pattern. A traveler walking along the shore of a loch sees a magnificent horse grazing near the water's edge. It appears tame, friendly even, and the temptation to approach it, to touch it, or even to mount it can be overwhelming. But the moment a person makes contact with the Ueach, the moment they touch its skin or climb onto its back, they become magically stuck to it, as if its hide were coated in the strongest glue ever made. They cannot pull away, they cannot dismount. And then, with terrifying speed, the creature turns and plunges directly into the loch, dragging its helpless victim down into the freezing black depths. What happens next is the stuff of nightmares. The Ueach does not simply drown its prey. According to the folklore, it devours them, tearing the body apart beneath the water. The only part it does not consume is the liver, which, according to the old stories, will float to the surface days later, a grim and unmistakable sign of what has happened. The Ueach is not always a horse. It is a shapeshifter, and it can also take the form of a beautiful young man, often seen near the loch's edge, charming and handsome, ready to lure an unsuspecting young woman into conversation and then into the water. In some accounts, it can even appear as a giant bird, though the horse form remains the most common and the most deadly. There is one crucial detail in the lore that offers a sliver of hope, a single chance at survival if you find yourself in the presence of an Ueach. The creature's power is tied to the water. If it can be lured or tricked away from the loch, onto dry land and far enough from the water's edge, it loses its supernatural strength and can be killed, or at least escaped. But this is easier said than done, for the Ueach is cunning and will fight with terrifying ferocity to return to its watery domain. The Ueach is closely related to a slightly less malevolent creature called the Kelpie, which haunts rivers and streams rather than deep lochs. While both are dangerous, the Kelpie is sometimes portrayed as merely mischievous, giving wild rides but occasionally releasing its victims alive. The Ueach, by contrast, is almost universally portrayed as a killer, a creature with no mercy and no humor, only hunger. These stories served a very real and practical function in Highland communities. The lochs of Scotland are genuinely dangerous. their waters cold enough to kill in minutes, their depths often unfathomable, and their edges deceptively unstable. By embodying that danger in the form of the Ichwisge, the folklore encoded a vital survival lesson in a way that was memorable, visceral, and effective. Children who might ignore a simple warning to stay away from the water would remember the story of the beautiful horse that drags you to your death. The Ichwisge is the dark, cold heart of the loch made flesh, a predator born from the landscape itself. As twilight deepens into full darkness, we venture now onto the lonely country roads of rural Ireland, where the sound of hoofbeats in the night can signal the arrival of one of the most terrifying figures in all of Celtic mythology. This is the Dullahan, the headless horseman, a creature so fearsome, so utterly associated with death and doom, that even other members of the fairy world are said to fear him. The Dullahan is not an omen, not a warning. He is an agent of death itself, a psychopomp, a harvester of souls, riding through the night on a mission that cannot be stopped, cannot be reasoned with, and cannot be escaped. The image of the Dullahan is unforgettable and profoundly disturbing. He appears as a rider, dressed in black, sitting astride a massive black horse whose eyes glow like burning coals. But where the rider's head should be, there is nothing, only the stump of a neck. He is not, however, without his head entirely. He carries it with him, tucked under one arm like a lantern. The head itself is a grotesque thing. Its skin is described as having the color and texture of moldy cheese, pale and waxy. Its eyes are small, black, and constantly moving, darting about in all directions, able to see across vast distances in the darkness. The mouth is frozen in a hideous grin that stretches from ear to ear, and the entire head glows with a faint, sickly phosphorescent light, which the Dullahan uses to illuminate his path as he rides. When the Dullahan stops his thunderous ride, when his horse's hooves finally come to a halt on a lonely road, he raises his severed head high, and with a voice like the cracking of a tomb, he speaks a single name. And at that moment, the person whose name he has spoken dies. Their soul is pulled from their body instantly, and there is no defense, no protection, no way to prevent it. The calling of the name is the ending of a life, a supernatural execution carried out with cold, mechanical precision. In some versions of the legend, the Dullahan does not ride alone, but drives a coach, the Coiste Bodar, the death coach. This vehicle is a nightmarish construction, a silent carriage that moves without sound, its wheels made from human thigh bones, its covering fashioned from dried human skin, and its lanterns nothing more than human skulls, with candles flickering inside the empty eye sockets. When the coach appears, it is coming to collect a soul, and its arrival is an announcement of imminent death. The Dullahan is a deeply territorial and proud creature, and he despises being observed. Irish folklore warns that if you see him from a window, if you peer at him over a stone wall or through a hedge, you are taking a terrible risk. He might flick his whip, which is made from a human spine, and strike out one of your eyes with supernatural accuracy, or he might fling a basin of blood at you, marking you as the next soul he will collect. The message is clear: do not watch, do not look, do not acknowledge. Draw the curtains, bar the door, and pray he passes by. Yet for all his power, for all his unstoppable supernatural authority, the Dullahan has one weakness, one substance he cannot abide, and that is gold. Even a small piece of gold, a coin, a ring, or even a pin, is said to be enough to repel him. Gold, with its incorruptible purity, its association with the sun and with divine light, acts as a shield against this creature of darkness. If a Dullahan approaches and sees gold, he will rear back, turn his horse, and vanish into the night. It is the only defense, the only thing standing between a mortal and the headless rider's grim purpose. The Dullahan's origins are the subject of much scholarly debate. Some folklorists believe he is a later Christianized adaptation of Crom Dubh, a pre-Christian deity associated with harvest and sacrifice. Others see in him echoes of the ancient Celtic practice of headhunting and the deep, symbolic importance of the severed head in Celtic art and religion. Whatever his ultimate origin, the Dullahan endures in Irish folklore as a figure of pure, elemental dread, the embodiment of death's inevitability, riding through the night with a purpose that cannot be denied. We turn now from the terrifying servants and messengers of death to a figure of infinitely greater power and complexity, a being who stands at the very pinnacle of Irish mythology. She is not a cryptid, not a monster lurking in the shadows, but a goddess, ancient and terrible, whose influence extends across the fields of battle, the threads of fate, and the very sovereignty of the land itself. This is the Morrigan, the Phantom Queen, and to understand her is to understand the beating heart of Celtic myth. Her name is a matter of scholarly debate. It may mean Phantom Queen or Great Queen, derived from the Old Irish Mór Rioghain. She is a goddess of war, but not in the simple sense of a deity who blesses warriors or grants victory. She is war itself, the chaos, the blood, the terror, and the exhilaration of battle made divine. She is a goddess of fate, appearing to heroes to foretell their doom. She is a goddess of death, haunting battlefields in the form of a carrion crow. And she is a goddess of sovereignty, embodying the land of Ireland and the rightful rule over it. The Morrigan is most often described not as a single entity, but as a triple goddess, appearing in 3 distinct forms, or as part of a trio of sisters. The most common grouping includes the Morrigan herself, along with Bardibi the battle crow and Macha, associated with sovereignty and horses. Sometimes Nemain, the goddess of frenzied battle, is also included. This triadic nature reflects the Celtic love of the number 3, and the idea that divine power often manifests in multiples, in cycles, in transformations. The Morrigan is a shapeshifter of extraordinary ability. She can appear as a beautiful young woman, as a withered crone, as a crow or a raven, as an eel, as a wolf, or as a heifer. Each form carries meaning, and each serves a purpose in the unfolding of fate. Her most famous appearance in Irish mythology occurs in the great epic, the Táin Bó Cúailnge, the cattle raid of Cooley, the central saga of the Ulster cycle. In this story, the Morrigan encounters the hero Cú Chulainn, the Hound of Ulster, the greatest warrior Ireland has ever known. She appears to him as a beautiful woman and offers him her love and her aid in battle. But Cú Chulainn, focused entirely on his duty and perhaps not recognizing her divine nature, rejects her, rudely and dismissively. The Morrigan, insulted and enraged, vows that she will hinder him in his next battle. When the fighting begins, she attacks him in 3 different animal forms. First as an eel that trips him in a river ford, then as a wolf that stampedes cattle toward him, and finally as a red heifer leading a charge. Each time Cú Chulainn fights her off, wounding her in the process. Later, she appears to him as an old woman milking a cow, bearing the wounds he inflicted. When he unknowingly blesses her 3 times as she offers him milk, he inadvertently heals her, fulfilling a prophecy that only a blessing from him could mend her injuries. This encounter reveals the Morrigan's dual nature. She is both an ally and an adversary, and her favor is as dangerous as her enmity. The Morrigan is also deeply associated with prophecy and the foretelling of doom. She appears on battlefields before and after the fighting, sometimes as a woman washing the armor and weapons of warriors at a river ford, much like the Scottish Bean Niga. Those whose armor she washes are doomed to die in the coming battle. After the great conflict, she perches on the shoulders of the slain as a crow, her harsh cries a song of victory and of death. She is the washer at the ford, the crow on the corpse, the voice that whispers of fate. In one of the most powerful passages in Irish mythology, after the final defeat of the Fomorians at the Second Battle of Mag Tuired, the Morrigan proclaims a prophecy, a vision of the future that is both beautiful and terrible, foretelling ages of peace and ages of ruin, the rise and fall of kings, and the eventual ending of the world. The Morrigan represents a worldview in which the divine is not separate from the brutal realities of existence, but woven directly into them. She is not a comforting goddess, not a gentle mother figure, but a force of nature as necessary and as dangerous as the storm, the flood, or the battle itself. To the ancient Celts, she embodied the fierce, unyielding spirit of the land and the understanding that sovereignty, true power, must be earned and maintained through strength, cunning, and the willingness to face fate head-on. She is the land, the battle, the fate, and the mystery, all bound together in a single, awe-inspiring figure. From the mournful wail of the banshee to the shape-shifting chaos of the puka, from the cold predatory depths where the Ichwiske dwells to the thundering hoofbeats of the Dullahan's midnight ride, and finally to the divine and terrible presence of the Morrigan herself. We have journeyed through a landscape where the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural dissolve like morning mist. These beings are not relics of a forgotten past. They are the living echoes of a worldview that saw every hill, every stream, every shadow as charged with meaning and power. They embody the fears, the hopes, the values, and the deep psychological truths of the Celtic people. The Banshee teaches us that death is not an ending to be ignored, but a crossing to be honored. The Puka reminds us that the world is wild and unpredictable, and respect for that wildness is wisdom. The Ichwiske warns us of the beauty that conceals danger. The Dullahan is the inevitability of mortality made manifest. And the Morrigan, she is the reminder that power, sovereignty, and fate are forces beyond our control, but not beyond our understanding. These stories have survived for centuries because they speak to something fundamental in the human experience. They remind us that there are mysteries in the world, that not everything can be explained, controlled, or tamed. And perhaps, in our modern age of certainty and screens, we need these stories more than ever. If you found this journey into the Celtic otherworld as fascinating as we did, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more explorations of the myths, legends, and mysteries that have shaped human culture across the globe. And we'd love to hear from you. In the comments below, tell us where you're from and what mythological creatures or legends from your own heritage we should explore next. The world is full of stories waiting to be unearthed. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the ancient Celtic world, and until next time, may your path be clear and your hearth be warm.